Hi, I'm Laura Wolf, and today we're talking about Feminine Creation 101. In particular, I'm talking about the differences between feminine creation and the masculine way that we've all been conditioned to create in our culture. The American dream that we've all been living under for the last couple hundred years is if you work hard, you can accomplish anything. And there's truth to that. You can accomplish a lot by working hard. It's just that that's not the only way to create. And working hard is not bad if you're loving it and you're really engaged with what you're doing and you're not hurting yourself in the process. But part of my passion is teaching women in particular that there are other ways of creating besides working hard. Before I get too deep into all of this stuff about masculine and feminine, I want to define those terms a little bit. There's a lot of conversation in our culture right now about what those terms mean. And in this context, I am talking about the movement of energy or the expression of energy. I'm not talking about gender identity. I'm not talking about whether a person identifies as a woman or a man or transgender or gender fluid or any of those kinds of identities. We all have masculine and feminine energies within us, and we need both of those energies in order to create anything. We live in a world that is very biased towards the masculine because we've been living under the rule of patriarchy for about 7,000 years, particularly in the Western world, but really patriarchy has ruled all over the world. In terms of creation, there are two polarities of energy that are at play. The feminine or yin expression of energy is free-flowing and formless and shapeless and chaotic and always flowing. It's just like this free-flowing movement of energy. Whereas the masculine polarity of energy or expression of energy is more structured and formed and directive. It's penetrative and holding structure. It's sometimes like very still and holding the structure for something. In order to kind of conceptualize this, a lot of times I'll look to nature for examples. Just last week I was in North Carolina on vacation with my son and my family, and we played in the waterfalls a lot. I love playing in waterfalls. It's one of my favorite things to do in life. And a waterfall is such a perfect example of this. The riverbanks and the boulders and the rocks form the structure, the tunnel through which the water, the feminine, the yin, freely flows. The water is formless and shapeless, and it just keeps flowing down the mountain through the structure. And the masculine principle of creation in this case is holding that channel for that feminine energy of creation to flow through. So I want to give you a little historical context for how this whole narrative of if you work hard, you can accomplish anything got so deeply embedded in our psyches. And for that, we need to go back to the Industrial Revolution, which was happening in the 1700s and 1800s, which is the exact same time that the United States of America, as an independent country from England, was being formed. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people lived in the country and grew food for a living. And people were, the land was mostly owned by the wealthy, by the nobility, and then the peasants worked the land but did not own the land. But they were having direct relationship with nature all day, every day. People were outside, hands in the dirt, planting seeds or weeding or harvesting or watering or just like tending to the fields and the animals, gathering herbs in the forest, hunting. People just had a much more connected relationship with nature. Most humans did for most of human history up until the 1700s. People had a deeper understanding of the cycles of nature and the cycles of times when you are working more and more productive and times when humans are resting and the land is resting during the wintertime being regenerated so that the fields could produce again in spring. So when humans lived much closer to the land and to the natural cycles of the land, we also lived much closer to our own biorhythms, our own need for rest and rejuvenation. And we weren't in productivity mode all the time. Then with the Industrial Revolution, all these inventions started happening in the 17 and 1800s for motorizing everything having to do with farming and with creating fabric for making clothes and just for creating everything. Everything started getting motorized. One example is with thread and weaving. It used to take two women working together for days on end on a loom, like a big wooden frame, weaving to create one piece of cloth. Then there were all these innovations in factories, and suddenly a factory could weave hundreds of pieces of cloth in one day instead of two women taking many days to weave one piece of cloth. So it used to be that people created everything with their own hands, and they were very intricately involved in every step of the creation process. And then with the invention of factories and all this motorization, people became, like cogs in the wheels of the factory, but they weren't as hands-on artistry with the creation of everything. And so there was just this a little more separation of people from the creation process. But another thing with the factories and with city living is that the living conditions for the working poor were terrible. Lots and lots of people lived together in very small spaces in apartment buildings that were generally full of filth and squalor. The factories were much the same, were just terrible working conditions, very dark. People worked very long hours because profit and productivity were the name of the game. That's what the factory owners wanted, and people were flocking into the cities to get these jobs because when they lived out in the country on the farms, they didn't own the land. They worked for the nobility and just for the right to live there and to grow enough grain to feed their family, but there was no way for them to accumulate their own money. And so people started flocking into the cities to work in these factories so that they could make their own money and have a chance of actually having a better life. But a lot of times it turns out it wasn't a better life. It was a really hard life. So fast forward now into today with the technological revolution, the information age that we live in, and there's more stress in today's world than in any other time in human history. There's a way that our culture conditions us to be plugged in to media at all times. And there's a whole bunch of other aspects of life that we're trying to manage at the same time. Jobs and family and kids and aging parents and taking care of our own bodies. It's a lot. The shadow side of this cultural narrative is the sense that if we don't work hard all the time, then we're lazy and undeserving. A lot of contemporary empowered women feel like we ought to be able to do it all. We ought to be able to keep up with our jobs, our friends, our kids, our parents, whatever's going on with the news, social media, and a lot of times it's more than could possibly be accomplished in a single day or even a single lifetime. The problem is that this lifestyle of going and doing all the time puts women into an adrenaline-driven state of depletion and exhaustion. Going and doing and looking at screens all the time literally fries our nervous system. The feminine body is literally not designed to be going and doing all the time. All that output of energy drains the feminine energetic system, and then we become depressed, anxious, exhausted, brittle, bitchy. It takes a toll on our sex drive. Turns out it's really hard for women to feel turned on when we're exhausted and depleted. So let's start to talk a little bit more now about the feminine process of creation. So the masculine process that we've all been taught is if you work hard, you can accomplish anything. It involves a lot of structure and drive and hard work and deadlines and forward moving energy. And again, there's nothing wrong with this way of creating. You can get a lot done that way. The only thing is that it tends to work better for men than for women overall, because the male body is designed to output energy, to move forward with energy. Let me explain that a little bit. Think about the process of procreation for human beings. The masculine's job is penetrative, is to direct the seed into the feminine vessel. The feminine's job in human procreation is to open up and receive the seed. The feminine process of creation, of creating anything, has to do with softening, opening, relaxing, and receiving, just like in procreation. Anything that we want to create can be created from these energies of receptivity and allowing and flow and pleasure and ease. No matter what you desire to create, being relaxed and open and full of pleasurable energy makes a woman very magnetic, and some might even say irresistible to creation itself. We are channels of energy. That's what we all are. We're all made of energy. We're all channeling energy all the time. But if we're tense and stressed out, and we're all like condensed up in our heads, tense in our jaws, necks, upper back area, it just constricts the amount of energy that can flow through us. And creation itself has a harder time moving through a tight vessel. Our job as the feminine is not to make it happen. Our job is to make it welcome. Source is the one that makes it happen. Source is infinitely creative, infinitely abundant, infinitely loving, and wants to pour through us all the time. So the more soft and open and receptive and full of pleasurable energy we are, the more easily Source, life itself, creation itself, can pour through us into our lives. I personally have a mission to help women learn these feminine ways of creation. We still are going to use our masculine action in the world at certain points in the creation process, but we don't need to be in massive action and doing all the time. And it's actually possible to create and receive way more of what you actually desire through feminine creation processes, rather than through this working and going and doing and being plugged in all the time. And I want women to be really empowered to know that we can create in collaboration with Source in a way that makes us healthier, that makes us happier, that enables us to create the kind of relationships that we want to create, and to really contribute our gifts to the world in a way that's nurturing for ourselves and nurturing for whoever we're serving, rather than creating and serving from exhaustion and depletion. So in the next upcoming video, we'll start to get more into some of the practices for feminine creation, so stay tuned.